the evidence that St. Monica's sat empty and had no tenant for a long time reflects the fact that it was left in a state of disrepair by the owners at the time. You know, of course, no one wants to rent a building that's in disrepair. And I'm a member of the community who has held volunteer positions both at Glen Eagles School and with other local community groups. And I can say that it is difficult to get community space that we need, even in those buildings that have been cited that seem to sit empty. It doesn't work for times that people want them. It doesn't work for price that people want. It doesn't work for the size of the room that people want. You know, it really is something that the community still needs, is this space. And I think there would be a demand for it. So that's sort of the other side of the need for the rezoning. I think we need the community space more than we need these houses. And then finally, over the 5 years since I bought my house in this area, the level of development in the area has increased substantially. There's currently a huge development in Horseshoe Bay that we all know about. And, you know, the success of that is yet to be known for our community. We don't know if that was a good decision or a bad one, and only time will tell. There's been houses built on my street and some renovated that were put on the market for sale and weren't sold, and now are short-term rentals. I certainly didn't buy my house in this wonderful community where everyone looked out for each other and helped each other out so that I could have short-term rentals filling up half the properties on my street. And so without a rezoning application going forward within the context of a community plan, I fear that that could happen, and it would be a huge mistake. So thank you.
Thank you. Ron Nairn, and then Mr. or Ms. Miller.
Yes, Madam Mayor, councillors, good evening. I live at 6480 Madrona Crescent, approximately 300 or 400 meters from the proposed development. I've lived there for approximately 9 years, and before that I grew up in West Vancouver for the first 21 years of my life. My grandfather was an architect, my father was an architect, and so I was raised understanding developments and redevelopment and heritage preservation. My grandfather was one of the architects of the Marine Building in Vancouver, one of Vancouver's great heritage buildings. In the 1980s, there was talk that it might be torn down because it was uneconomic. Now we all know the value in that heritage, at least I hope we do. St. Monica's Church represents 70 years of West Vancouver's heritage. Now I understand that it is not on the heritage roster. I understand that there's nothing that council can do on its face to prevent demolition. Nonetheless, in my respectful submission, council ought to be considering what is the best use for this land, what ought to be done under ideal circumstances, and does this development meet that particular criteria? And I would argue it does not. The density is far too high for the neighborhood, and we lose a valuable piece of our heritage. It is worth saving if it can be done. It is not just that this is a church and an architectural building that's worth preserving. It's the community space, as many speakers have already said. I don't want to repeat what others have said, but can there ever be too much community space? Is that really something that we can do without? I would also like to speak briefly on the community plan, because in my view, the proposed development is in conflict with it. What I'm saying now is really largely already been covered by Mr. Faw, but I will go over it myself. I looked at the official community plan, and at page 23, the various objectives with respect to housing are set out, and it notes that the OCP is legislatively required to guide housing development throughout a community. To address the needs of the present and future generations in our community, this OCP seeks to regenerate our primarily detached, single-family-oriented neighborhoods with sensitive infill options such as smaller houses on smaller lots, coach houses, and duplexes. So, as Mr. Faw pointed out, what do we mean by sensitive? My argument would be a 14-unit complex in a very small plot of land is not sensitive infill. Nothing in the neighborhood is anything like that. Everything else is single-family homes with at most perhaps a basement suite. We can have infill. I am not against developing properties and adding duplexes and sensitive infill, but to have 14 units in this particular small confined area seems to me not to be sensitive to the neighborhood. Expand the missing middle housing options like triplex, townhouse, and mixed use in locations close to transit, shops, and amenities. Well, first of all, we know we have a number of single-family homes that's being proposed, but I would also point out something that hasn't been mentioned yet. This property is at the top of a large hill. So the amenities are down in Horseshoe Bay. That's where the stores, shops, restaurants are. And as a resident who frequently does do the climb from Horseshoe Bay to the top, not many residents will do that on a regular basis. So this is not something that's close to the Horseshoe Bay area. As far as being on transit, it is on a transit line. That bus, the 250, takes what, about an hour to go to downtown Vancouver? If folks are going to be moving into these housing units and working downtown, I very much doubt that they will be using this particular type of transit. The local area plan has not yet been completed. That is, again, one of the important parts of the OCP. And this is a market development. It does nothing to increase affordability. It is simply a developer looking to maximize his development costs. And I will wrap it up there. Thank you.
Thank you. So council, we need a motion. So the motion is that the October 8th, 2019 public hearing be extended past 10 p.m. until conclusion of the public hearing. Okay, great. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thanks so much. So we'll move on to, looks like C or A Miller. And Miller is the next speaker, and then Bill Whitehead after that. So did Mr. and Ms. Miller wish to speak, or they're not here? And we got Bill Whitehead next. So I see that we have uh, 16 more speakers signed up. Don't want to discourage anybody from speaking, but perhaps consider not repeating other things that have been said. You can come up and speak, of course. Because 15, I don't even know if I can do the math at this point, but times 5 minutes is 77, yeah, 80 more minutes, so that's an hour and 20 minutes. Okay, thank you. Mr. Whitehead.
Good evening. I'm Bill Whitehead. I live in Lower Caulfield, and I'm opposed to this project. And you just took the words out of my mouth. I just deleted 2 pages here because people have made the point, and I can just say I'm in support of them. Regarding the company's survey report, as mentioned, the website is the first time I've seen a ballot box that didn't have a no button. A substantial portion of their online survey was from North Vancouver. Are our affordability schemes here going to end up denting our neighborhoods just to solve someone else's problem? It's like anything we do to improve our affordability is going to get diluted by outsiders taking advantage of it. A noticeable number of the supporters strike me as a new type of buyer speculation. They sound like they want the neighborhood changed to get them a lower price. I'm afraid if they want density, they should buy in a dense area. Not just have what's there changed. Zoning precedents. For those in West Vancouver who did support densification here, was it pointed out to them that these things set precedents, allowing them to impose on others will lead to someone in the future being allowed to impose on them. For instance, a 3 to 5 story apartment building across the street. Would the would-be buyers of Tantalus Gardens really like that to happen 10 years down the road? Zoning is either constant or it is meaningless. You can't say, here's the rules, and then overrun them every 5 or 10 years. That's not zoning protection. It's a fundamental flaw with the development permit idea, especially because it starts to follow political winds. When we come to the bottom line, I think the message would be that the residents here don't actually want steadily increasing densification. It's probably true in all of West Van. So affordable housing is a cute political position, but I think it will backfire in a couple of terms because things will not be better despite what was done to the neighborhoods. Housing will not become cheaper. More existing residents will become annoyed, and newcomers will become annoyed when the doubling down on densification hits them. I think the reality is that all that can be done is talk to people candidly, undo their false impression that government is a solve-all resource. If the prices are too high, sorry folks, that's all you can do. I think the only cure people can do is to spread out. We have lots of space in this country. Let's not destroy a bunch of neighborhoods on the way to learning that. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris Ball is next, and then Scenery Slater.
Good evening, and thank you for extending the meeting. I appreciate this is eating into your personal time and sleep, as it is many of us. I just had a couple of points to make. One was the comparison by the paid consultant of CUMA, comparing ages of homes to the new product that CUMA is developing as though they were apple to apple. And I, too, live in a house that is built at a time that's actually older than I am, and I'm 50 years old. It was built in 1959, and 80% of it is new. And it would list at probably 1.5 to 1.7 in the neighborhood. So it's not a fair apple-to-apple comparison, not to mention the fact that it's on a lot with a yard and you can have a garage and so on. I did some quick calculations on Rate Hub. If you look at the medium West Van household income of $166,000, that qualifies you for a $550,000 mortgage with 5.5% down on a 5-year fixed term at 2.44% on a 25-year mortgage. So there's $1 million shortfall there in terms of affordability. Similarly, if you increase the income to $200,000 with $100,000 down under those same terms, it takes the mortgage up to a maximum of $1 million. Again, we're having a shortfall of well over half $500,000. The medium Vancouver household income, by comparison, is roughly $75,000. So there's no affordability being addressed here. It's an outright, at best, it's misleading presentation of the facts by the developer's consultant. At best, it's a lie. So it's a bit disappointing. I chose to move into the neighborhood because of the character and texture of it being single family. So this change in density impacts the character at which I chose to live in. And I don't appreciate that, and it's why I am against this project. And the developer also came to my home. I spoke with him. Lovely guy. I'm glad he does all these things in the community. I mean, I'm president of a not-for-profit that alleviates poverty in third world countries. We built 256 homes, two schools. I sit on the board of the North Shore Community Foundation, and we gather assets to reinvest back in the community through interest income. And West Van has a major shortage of affordable options. It has a major shortage of options for youth to get access to resources and help, such as drug abuse, substance abuse, and so on. And if we're going to look at taking a rezoning opportunity and making it into something that's going to bring some upside to the community, I would suggest that there are many other priorities at stake, other than the only upside that I can see is this, as someone who actually lives in the community, is profit for a developer. Thanks.
Scenery Slater, and then Linda McNabb.
Hi, my name is Scenery Slater, and I live at 1730 Duchess Avenue, which is the opposite end of the district from Horseshoe Bay. At candidates meeting last October, all of you were asked Do you support retaining community use designation on properties currently zoned specifically for community use? You were asked this because citizens highly value and benefit from this rare zoning. And I would ask that you recall your sentiments of a year ago and deny this rezoning and development application. You were doing a disservice to our entire community to consider rezoning the community use portion of, AKA the St. Monica's Church property, particularly prior to the completion of the Horseshoe Bay Local Area Plan, or LAP. The LAP calls for a significant population increase in the area, making community use zoning even more precious than it already is. It would be incredibly short-sighted to convert this now to merely housing before the long-term ramifications of the area plan are known. Rezoning a community use zone property should demand the absolute highest level of scrutiny, public input, and more so, public support, and should only be considered if the benefit to the community is exceptional. The exceptional bar should be held very high, as community use zone property already has the potential to have the highest possible benefit for a community. In many ways, citizens have happily and already paid for these community use properties through permissive tax exemptions. To me, this is yet another reason that the zoning should be ensured to be exceptional benefit. The argument that the Glen Eagles Community Centre can fill the community use void is speculative and tenuous at best. When the Ambleside Youth Centre burned down, at-risk youth declined to attend programs at the community centre. When the West Vancouver Masonic Hall closed after it was purchased by a speculator, most of the programs and events relocated to North Vancouver, to church basements, to Legion halls and the like. West Vancouver is unfortunately lesser for that. Make no mistake, our community centres are wonderful, but they cannot, nor should they, be everything to everyone. We still need places where groups and neighbours can walk to, where they can meet at little or no cost, where they can conduct fundraising, political, or even religious events. A group cannot hold a car wash at our community centres. Heck, West Van community centres, you can't even draw an undraped model, which is a key element of basic art education. We have not yet had the opportunity to make a thorough and unbiased analysis of all realistic options for this site, be it a flexible community hall that could double as an emergency muster station, a day center for those with dementia, or a myriad of other yet unexplored options. Unfortunately, we're not going to get the opportunity to assess all those possible options because we are fettered by this being excluded from the Horseshoe Bay Local Area Plan, which in turn exacerbates the many long-standing shortcomings of our development process, some of which I've heard today. The divergent information about the surveys is terribly troubling. Now, our development process is not only unpopular with developers, but for years it has left citizens feeling bewildered, silenced, and excluded. And those like myself that supported the approval of the official community plan last year did so after multiple assurances that the really important elements, heights, density, and zoning, would be shaped by citizens in the LAPs. I am not alone in feeling a little bit betrayed that we're now considering spot zoning again, and the very thing the OCP is supposed to mitigate. Here we are, though, at a public hearing, which is also known as the faint hope clause, because most citizens, it's the very last step in the aforementioned less than optimal development process. Without a solid and meaningful process beforehand, a public hearing is often skewed to practiced and confident speakers over lay folk whom public speaking is torture, and it forces us into a win-lose outcome. We are not allowed to explore alternate possible best solutions. I have heard arguments that it is unfair to delay because it would be unfair to the developer. And while I'm not unsympathetic, we should be, land speculation, especially those requiring zoning changes, carries risk. It's a disservice to go ahead with this. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. And next is Kathy Williscroft, and then Carol Ann Reynolds. Oh, sorry, I checked Linda McNabb. Are you Linda McNabb? Sorry, Linda McNabb is next, thanks. Okay, thank you. All right. She opposes. So, sorry, Kathy Williscroft.
Thank you. My name is Kathy Williscroft, and I'm a Horseshoe Bay resident. I don't consider myself a political person, and in fact, this is the first time ever in my life that I have contacted municipal office or to speak in a public hearing. I feel compelled to do so on this topic of community connection and essentially the quality of our neighborhoods. I'm speaking up tonight to express my concern about the timing of the rezoning vote for the development of Tantalus Gardens. The 4-stage local area plan for the revitalization of Horseshoe Bay should be completed before a vote to rezone a community space to residential space takes place. The timing of the vote feels premature and inconsistent with the messaging of the LAP, which talks about building community and connection now and for our future. The land of St. Monica's Church sits within the physical boundaries of the LAP, and I hope that the zoning decision will be held until the LAP is completed. 5 years ago, my husband, myself, our 3 kids, and our dog moved to Horseshoe Bay from the west side of Vancouver, where I grew up. We lived through the demise of Dunbar and West Point Grey neighborhoods, the rise in property prices, empty homes, and stores being shut down. There is very little sense of community on the west side anymore. Block parties are few and far between. People do not invite others into their homes, and the many heritage buildings have also been torn down and redeveloped. Horseshoe Bay holds a very special place for us and many others in the area. It's a place where people walk their dogs, chat with neighbors, have parties, host open houses, welcoming others into the neighborhood. Many visitors come through the area from the ferry, riding their bikes, going to White Cliff Park. Horseshoe Bay also services people from Bowen Island, Sunshine Coast, and Lions Bay. What we have is really special. A feeling of an old school neighborhood where we look after each other and we actually know our neighbors by name, or at least we know their dog's name. We have friends who live in Ambleside and Dunderave, but they join us in Horseshoe Bay for Halloween because there's much more community and fun here. We can't afford to compromise the few opportunities that we have to foster connection, especially in this tenuous age of social media and isolation that many people feel. Please consider this plea to pause the rezoning vote until after the completion of the LAP so that more public input can be heard by the council and the current property owner. I'm not opposed to development, but I am opposed to the plans for Tantalus Gardens. I'm hopeful for an alternative which preserves some community space and finds the best value for that property.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Carol Ann Reynolds, and then Katie Helinski.
Good evening.
It's not on.
Yes, it's on. No, that's on. That's on.
Good evening. It's working now. Thank you. Carol Ann Reynolds, editor of West Van Matters and chair of Heritage West Van. This evening has been extremely interesting. I've never heard such a lot of comments and so much to think about. I've learned a lot listening to many of the people speaking this evening. There are several reasons I wanted to speak because I wanted information about. One is that I, of course, felt that public assembly zoning should be kept. I wasn't aware of the history that it was supposed to be by law kept, and so I would like to have more information on that in future. The other thing is that it has some heritage aspects, so I think that should be looked at. I also feel that the roundabout suggestions that were made for that area were very interesting. So I think we have an opportunity of what we're going to do about this, because I had thought, since I'd heard many people on council saying that this should be delayed until the local area plan for Horseshoe Bay had been finished, because it was included. And I agreed with it being delayed with regard to the development because it's part of the whole. And so I hope that that is still a possibility, because I got the impression that most people on council were in favor of that. Now, the local area plan also reminds me that people have talked about that we should also get involved in the neighborhood character working group. I've been going to those meetings, and I have been advocating, and I advocated long before this was on, that every neighborhood, if they want to keep their characteristics, they should come up with their own characteristics they want in their neighborhood and come to council. You can't have one plan for the whole of the municipality, because nobody wants it to be all the same, or would have to be so bland and general that it would be almost meaningless. A few neighborhoods got together. They didn't always last long. But if we want the diversity, that's fine. A neighborhood can decide they want to be single family. Another neighborhood can decide they want to have duplexes or whatever they want. But you have the diversity of the will and consent and desire of the people who live there. So whatever is done, now what we've heard tonight, which surprised me, and it was beautiful to hear, is so many people so involved with their neighborhood. They want to keep the characteristics and the spirit of their neighborhood. I think that's a great thing for a neighborhood to have. So you feel you belong and you have a say. I looked at the Roundabout website, and there's some very interesting things about that. It does have more residential area, which we need for housing, but it also keeps the public assembly and things like the people want there. By the way, there was someone who tried to have a meeting at the Glen Eagles Community Center, and he said, I tried to get a meeting there, but it was full. I couldn't book it. And then we just heard of someone recently saying that a lot of the community events that some neighborhoods want can't be held at a community center or the clubhouse. So there's another reason for a great need for the public assembly place in that area. Whether it's going to be a park or houses or whatever, but I mean, I hope that since it's owned by someone else, there is no perhaps personal obligation not to let the church disintegrate. Then it couldn't be saved. It couldn't be used for something else. This is what happened to Cleewick. Municipality bought it, and then they didn't keep it up. And so I'm hoping that we want possibilities of the future for that public assembly building, the former church, that they make sure that whoever owns it cannot demolish it or let it decay. That is part of our heritage. As someone mentioned, and I was told that today, there are windows that are from France. But the main thing, of course, is you want neighborhood input, what the neighbors want. They should tell us what they want in that neighborhood, and we should try to accommodate them as practically and reasonably as we can. Thank you very much. I hope
Thank
you
you,
will delay it
Caroline.
for the LAP.
Thank you. Katie Helinski, and then George Pajari on deck.
I don't know how to use this. I'll try to keep this brief. Good evening, Madam Mayor and Council. My name is Katie Helinski. I was born on Bay Street in Horseshoe Bay, and I'm an architect in the community. My husband and I live in Eagle Harbor. Our children go to school at Glen Eagles, and I'm here to support the community that I am a part of with my kids at school at Glen Eagles. A lot of people are impacted, and they are quite upset, as you can see, about the proposal that's on the table right now. I do think that this lot is an opportunity for density. But I don't want to see density become like a dirty word in the public once we see these things developed, especially in the west of West Van. The west of West Van is special, and I know there's a neighborhood character working group. There's something that I think one of the councillors said during the tree bylaw workings, where they talked about a green necklace around sites and properties that softens architecture and allows for privacy and screening. And I think that's a huge importance in this neighborhood and one of the characteristics of the neighborhood. So if you can see this, here's the project site. You can see that it's a pretty amazing area in terms of green, tree coverage, plantings, gardens, forest. And I think that's one of the main characteristics of living there. There was a comparison with Duchess and 14th. My aunt lives in this neighborhood in an apartment. So Duchess and 14th is largely condos, apartments. There is a row house development in here. But to compare density with Ambleside in where we live out here in the trees seems like a little bit of a blanket statement. And when I looked at the proposal, basically, when we think about missing middle in architecture, it's basically duplexes and beyond. And it's also rental infill. And it addresses a certain demographic of people who can't rent. People who, like, even in my office, what can they afford? Can they afford 1.5 million? That's a pretty steep mortgage payment. So I pointed to a project that was done in Lynn Valley in the 1970s by a few architects who were a bit idealistic at the time. It's still there. It's called Cedar Village. It's 10 units per acre, and it's rental units, purpose rental. So I think rental addresses a missing middle, and I think townhouses address a missing middle. And then I'm kind of wondering what addresses the actual character of the area. When I look at the proposal, I see 6 single-family residential units. I see 4 duplexes, all built on a parkade. It's 14 units on 0.65 acres. And I'm just concerned that the green space on this parkade will be very limited and very expensive to build. A structural slab in itself, usually we see parkades in multifamily developments, and then they're exempt because they are serving a bigger amount of units. When we build single-family residential, as soon as we leave the footprint of the house, we have to include that area 100% in FAR and 100% in coverage. So in this proposal, anything beyond the footprint of the house was not included in FAR and not included in coverage. So it's kind of the best of both worlds where it's 6 single-family residential and the FAR is considered low, but when you look at the underground parkade and the amount of exemption and the amount of lot and porosity that's taking up on the lot, it equates to much more than in the document. So the watercolor renderings are beautiful, but when you look at the actual landscape plan, it's not the same as what the renderings show. On the boulevard planting plan, boulevards being a perfect spot to put vegetation and trees and soften architecture. We see 3 small Styrax japonicas on Wellington. These are deciduous, slow-growing, not native ornamental trees. And we see 3 Serbian spruce on Rosemary, with 5 trees to be determined. Thank you. That's all for now.
Thank you. George Pajari and then Jennifer Latler.
Your Worship and Council, I come back to talk about community amenity contributions. And let's cut to the chase and talk in terms that are easily understood. I've got 2 boxes here. This is the property with the existing zoning. I've got a larger box, which is the property after the zoning. The property owner could currently take this box, put in 4 houses. He's asking you to give him a larger box so he can put in lots of houses. And you're telling us the value of these 2 boxes is exactly the same? That there are no CACs applying? Really? Pardon me for thinking that's accounting that would make Enron and Bernie Madoff proud. Some councillors wrote to me saying the developer can't pay CACs because he's not making much on the development. Well, so what? Where is the developer's profit mentioned in the council's policy on uplift? Where is it in the OCP? CACs are compensation to the community for the impact and costs of massively increasing density. CACs aren't the money left on the table after the developer has overpaid for the land and his other expenses. CACs are based on the fair market value of real estate density, nothing more, and certainly nothing less. And the fair market value density in West Vancouver is not zero. I never thought I'd have to come to council to say something that is so painfully obvious to those of us on this side of the horseshoe. In West Vancouver, the fair market value of real estate density is not zero. If the developer came to you and said, here, look, here's my pro forma. See, I have no money left to pay your development charge costs. I have no money to pay your taxes. What would your response say? That's fine, we like your development. You don't have to pay those charges. Of course not. And you can imagine if you went to his bank and say, I'm sorry, I overpaid for the property and I have no money left to pay the interest on the mortgage. Your role as councillors is to protect the rights of the community, not to give them away on a platter. If this development is not economically viable as proposed, and that's essentially what you're saying, then your role isn't to give the developer a couple of $1 million in foregone CACs to help him make it work. It's to tell him to come back with an economically viable development. He's spent so much on the property. He has to spend so much on density that's really expensive on this lot. So of course there's no CACs left because he spent it elsewhere. So please, do the responsible thing. Either adjourn this hearing until the developer can rework his project to include a reasonable CAC, or close the hearing, deny the rezoning, and wait for this developer or another to come back with an economically viable development that doesn't require you to give away the community's rights to the tune of a couple of $1 million in effective subsidy. In short, this proposal is not worth council giving it the subsidy that you are essentially doing so by foregoing the CACs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Pajari. I do feel that I would like Mr. Bailey to respond to that. It's not quite as simple as portrayed.
Madam Mayor, so I'm not entirely sure exactly what I'm responding to specifically, but in terms of the assertion that we are compensating the applicant for overpaying, that's not factual whatsoever. We don't consider the applicant's purchase price in our analysis. We look at comparable market data of what the property is worth under existing zoning, so the existing RS zone and PA zone, and that factors into our pro forma. We do build in a reasonable developer profit that is associated with typically with what banks are willing to finance holding costs for developers because they need a certain profit margin in order to assume a carrying cost on a property. And then we calculate, as I said before, construction costs as part of that, including soft costs. But we don't subsidize the developer. We in fact very clearly say to developers that we're not going to reward bad business decisions by you overpaying for lots. That's kind of fundamental to the whole process.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. The problem is, I'm now talking with my hands tied behind my back.
No, you can.
Planning is using figures he won't share with me. Last night he said the district doesn't rely on the developer's figures, but he won't tell us what figures he is relying upon. So how can I counter an argument where he holds the cards and I don't know the data?
Mr. Pajari, you don't need to. I was just asking Mr. Bailey to explain the calculation of residual land lift. Residual land value is the basis, and in a very simple layman's terms, the CACs are only paid on increases to the land value, not any buildings or density, increases on the land value of a change in zoning. And it's fairly complex, but I'll just leave it at that. Okay, so we'll move on to Jennifer Blattler. And then after that is Barty Hall.
Thank you, everyone, for your time this evening. This has been a very tenuous last few months for everyone that lives in this community. I'm very fortunate to live in the Horseshoe Bay community. My partner and I are living in a family home that we will need to decide over the next few years what we are going to do with that family home. But in the meantime, I'd like to address that the council that we voted here today has a housing strategic goal to focus on the initiatives should the housing accommodate families of school-aged children and also the workforce that works in the community, such as fire, police, teachers, and nurses. I am a nurse. I work at Lionsgate Hospital, and it would be lovely to stay in this community. Furthermore, I'd like to see more social well-being incorporated into this planning development. Finding a permanent home for the adult daycare would be wonderful, and also supporting the North Shore Integrated Food System, which was also addressed on your strategic planning for the social well-being of our community. So what I want to illustrate here today is that we're in a very, very serious situation of rezoning. We have voted you as our voice, and we as the community are voicing that we would like more time in decision-making for this rezoning of this property. That's pretty much all that I have to say tonight. Thank you.
Thank you for your brevity. Barty Hall, and then Dave Wolstenholme. Barty Hall, and then Dave Wolstenholme. Sorry? Oh yeah, it might be Barry Hall.
You like Barty better.
I'll try to be brief, and it's late. You've heard this theme before, but I maybe have a little bit of a different twist on it. I'd like to know how much you're prepared to risk the credibility of our local area planning process in its first real application. And with Ambleside, Dunderave, Taylor Way, and Cypress Village coming soon. I'm a strong believer in the value and integrity of participatory local area planning to meet both community needs and to contribute to the overall OCP policies. The key to its success is community participation, and that requires respect and trust among participants and between participants and planning authorities. In Horseshoe Bay, the local area plan was enthusiastically endorsed by residents. By participating, they could see that they could significantly influence the future of their community. Unfortunately, within the first few months of its implementation, that influence is being threatened, and the credibility of this process, I believe, is in jeopardy. Yes, the OCP Section 2.115 allows spot zoning during the LAP. But do you really want to play that developer's escape card and allow a zoning decision through this highly flawed public hearing process? Or will you show your trust in the LAP process that you sold to residents as a vehicle to influence their community's future? Council asked residents to adjust or confirm the boundaries of the LAP study area in the vision phase. Residents responded, adjust the boundaries to include the St. Monica's site. So why did they say that? Because they didn't care if the district spot zoned it anyways? No. Rather, so alternative land uses could be explored and best use determined within their LAP. Applying that process now is not further kicking the can down the road. It's respecting your commitment to residents. It's about preserving trust. When your West Van constituents approved OCP policies and LAPs, we expected to eliminate the spot zoning battles that have plagued this community. No more flooding councillors' inboxes. No more letters to the North Shore News. No more packing council chambers till the wee hours. But now at the first LAP application, we are back in the middle of it, and our participatory planning process is being ignored. Don't allow it. Put this spot zoning decision into the LAP where it deserves to be and where your constituents expect it to be. The LAP will determine the scope and context of community needs, alternative ways to meet those needs, where they can be met, and how the community can best contribute to your overall goals of the OCP. The next LAP step for Horseshoe Bay is the options phase, where residents and planners prepare potential planning and design options based on the vision for Horseshoe Bay. Give it a chance to work. I just received the district's option phase invitation. It says to join others in our community to explore and discuss options for land use, building form, and public spaces in Horseshoe Bay Village. During visioning, staff reported that 95% of the comments on St. Monica's wanted it preserved for community space. So are you really going to take that option off the table in their LAP? It's irreversible. What might the district lose by moving this zoning decision to the LAP? A few single-family units and a few duplex housing units that exceed the density tolerance of many residents, are not affordable by relevant criteria, and contain no rentals. All within the context of 160 new units being developed at Sewell's, and through the LAP, probably 200 plus community approved units in this village. What might we gain? Just a couple of paragraphs, if I may. What might be gained by moving it to the LAP?
You got to wrap up.
All right.
Time.
All right, fine. You know what we'll gain. This is not time for councillors to manufacture a limited compromise to facilitate spot zoning. The residents around Horseshoe Bay understand their community amenity needs.
Mr. Hall.
3 lines, please.
No. Sorry,
All
I got to
right.
stop you. There's people that are
My
waiting.
last words. Trust them.
No.
Trust them
Thank
in their
you.
LAP.
Thank you very much. So Dave Woolston-Home, and then Aaron Guppy.
Well, Your Worship, members of council, my name is David Woolston-Home, and I live approximately 400 meters from Tantalus Gardens. Well, St. Monica's Church. I'm strongly opposed to this project. I believe we need to consider highest and best use. Housing and community space are essential to the fabric of our community. We have such a small amount of public assembly land that it is unreasonable to take such a short-term view and to rush this process. We are talking about 14 homes, but more importantly, at the gateway to Horseshoe Bay, the gateway to our community. We need to be realistic and reasonable about the decisions we are making. We need to ensure that we have community space for the long term. I'm not opposed to development, and I know that density is coming. And as that density comes and that density develops, the community space or public amenity space will be that much more important. As this night has gone on, I've made a lot of notes, and so I can't quite read what I've totally written, but I can get to some of the core points. Let us call this for what it is. This is a for-profit market housing development for high-income earners, which requires PA land rezoning with zero community benefit. This is a developer that somehow thinks he should get special treatment on the LAP process. But one of the things I have not heard today is that both on the Park Royal area plan and the Ambleside area plan, there were 4 specific developments that were in play either before an LAP process or after an LAP process, but all 4 had to wait until the completion of the LAP process. More importantly, to consider not waiting for the LAP process to be complete sends a very worrying message to our community. The community engagement is not worth the paper it is written on. Why should our community spend any more time on the LAP process or council engagement if it can be hijacked in such a manner? Anecdotally, or maybe the word is ironically, for the purpose of our meeting to talk about possibility, to be reasonable, and to consider other choices for this site, we needed some space. We needed some space so we could get together and talk about it. I've heard tonight about, oh, there's lots of availability at Glen Eagles, at the community center. Well, we tried to book time. We said we want 4 hours. They said the only time we can put you in is Friday between 7 p.m. and 11 p.m. And that will cost you $600 for your community meeting. We need alternatives. So, as we talk about the missing middle, and I've heard it so many times tonight, but is that in fact our greatest priority? We talk about the missing middle like it's the second coming. And yet, what about the seniors? What about rental? What about affordability? What about our community? I am reasonable. I'm not looking for a return to a sleepy fishing village of Horseshoe Bay 30 years ago or 40 years ago. The coming population is something we need to prepare for. We need something reasonable. We need something well-planned and something with far less unknowns. The voices of opposition, you have heard them tonight, are loud and meaningful. I believe you have heard them, and I appreciate you listening. I respectfully ask that you wait until the LAP process is complete and consider the desires of our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Aaron Guffey, and then Nina Jessen.
Numbum. Oh, thank you guys for your time. I've lived on Madrona Crescent for, let's see, on and off for 44 years of my life now. So I remember when Mom and Dad bought in 69 or 70. West Van had a very sort of specific plan as to how that neighborhood was going to look. And it was going to be, I believe, 3 homes per acre, lots of trees, landscape, neighborhood feel. I mean, we walked to Glen Eagles. I got baptized in the church. I did my Girl Guides there. I've now returned to the family home. And the things that I heard Mom and Dad talk about the community then, and I kind of went, oh, it's West Van, you know, it's so, special. I get now in a different way. I get it as an adult about how special the community is, growing up in it, coming back to it, and my mom teaching in it. That piece of land is special emotionally to me, and I would hate to see us lose a meeting place, a community place that is different from the rec centers within which I've worked over the years. I would hate us to put the cart before the horse, so to speak, and rezone an area without thinking a little bit differently about how we want that to look for my next 44 years, if I'm so blessed. So I think everything's been pretty much covered. I'm going to repeat myself if I say it all again, but I would challenge you guys and us as a community to dare to be a little different and stand out and make some unique changes to the community instead of just building more and more homes and building it right out to the streets and filling up an already congested area and kind of taking away from the uniqueness of what I've called home for so long. So thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you. Nina Jessen, and then John Liso. Is Miss Jessen here?
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Nina, and I've lived at 6522 Wellington Place for over 50 years. And I'm here again speaking. I never thought I'd have to do this twice, but here I am having to do it twice. I just want you to know that what I'm thinking, that community is really important to the people of Horseshoe Bay. I think you probably gathered that by now, by all the people that have come here tonight. We've all decided that we need a place to come together. We need to share things, share our lives together, have some place, an affordable place for our clubs, for our kids to meet, for soccer, daycare, elder care, music, something affordable, something we can get together for. I've crossed a lot of mine out because a lot of people have said the same things. But you guys asked us to go away and talk, and we did that. Many of us were in isolation when we left last time in May, and we came out as a group and gathered together, and now we're pretty strong, and we have a very strong idea that we want this as a community place. This is a historic building. We feel that this is a historic building. I'm sorry it isn't designated that way, but it should be. This is a groundswell movement, and we don't want to rezone a community place of worship, because when you rezone a community place of worship, you lose that place. And this group of people that I've met, we don't want to do that. We want a place where community can be worshipped. So we don't want to lose this. So even if Kuma, I think that's how you pronounce it, and the council have no imagination for what this place could be about community, I think this whole process has shown me that there is a lot of imagination in the Horseshoe Bay community for what this place could be. I understand that you have a real need for housing and that you have pressure for density and affordability from maybe higher up from you and maybe other people in the community. But I think that what we've shown you tonight is that Kuma and other parts of West Vancouver are addressing those $1.5 million range or up for people that have that kind of price point in Park Royal or in the Horseshoe Bay area where you have now rezoned it for duplexes. So there's going to be lots of those kind of development or coming up. So I don't think you need to worry about that. What I think you need to worry about are essential services, people like teachers, firefighters that can't afford to live in West Vancouver. So let's use some imagination. Let's use part of the property here for that and the rest for community. So I really hope that you will consider, the council will consider what the majority of people that I have met believe that are close to St. Monica's Church. That we need a localized community center, we need some innovative ideas for housing, real low to middle income housing, and we need to look at a site. We need to look at the site also, what people brought up, that why is it a community site that has been paid public money to? Why are we losing this? Like people brought that up, that there was, that in the past that people had been contributing public funds to it, and I thought that was interesting tonight and something we should think about as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
It came up before and I wasn't going to raise it, but I thought I'd ask Mr. Bailey to clarify. There's no, to our knowledge, there's no covenants on the land restricting it from being sold. Is there?
Madam Mayor to Councillor Cameron, no.
My understanding is I don't know the history of how the church acquired it, but the church had it on the market for good money and sold it to Mr. Nielsen on the open market and walked away with the money. So it's not, there's nothing, we didn't fail to enforce some sort of, there's no impropriety about that.
It's a privately owned site.
Okay, and so there's no restrictions. And are you aware of any promises that were made at one point that it would never be sold?
Nope.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. John Liso, and then Jillian Hunt.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council. My name is John Lesso. My address is 3519 Capilano Road, North Vancouver. Earlier today, I submitted to you an email outlining my objections to approval of this Tantalus Gardens development. I won't dwell on those right now, but I just want to reiterate. It is a spot zone, there are no CACs, and it's based on a bogus survey. A bogus survey. And my reasons are outlined in that email. That's all I'm going to say. Now, I served on the Whatcom County Planning Commission for 8 years. I was a planning commissioner. And I can tell you that this type of proposal with those deficiencies would never, ever pass muster before a county planning commission, before the Bellingham Planning Commission, before anyone. And as a Canadian citizen, I'm amazed that you're even considering this seriously. Now, when I was a planning commissioner and there was a controversial land use decision, I made it a point to walk the site. Sometimes that involved driving 50, 75 miles, but that's what I did, because walking the site gives you a feeling of what the site's like, what the elevation is, what the noise levels are, what the ambience is of the neighborhood. Now, I'd like to ask you, everyone, when was the last time you walked the site? Because you should.
Mr. Lisi.
Because you should.
Yeah, focus
Now,
on your comments.
I beg your pardon?
This isn't for you to ask council questions, this is for you to focus on.
I'm just posing this as a suggestion then, not a question. However, I don't have any dog in this fight. I don't. But I think it's incumbent on our elected representatives and certainly the planning department to become involved in what's going on at this site and not just pore over these beautiful drawings and these one-dimensional plans. That's not walking the site. That's not how you determine character. Walk the site and reject this proposal. It's a spot zone, there's no CACs, and it's based on a bogus survey.
Thank you. So Ms. Hunt, Jillian Hunt is next.
Madam Mayor and Council, thank you again for staying this evening. I am here. My name is Jillian Hunt. I live at 6606 Wellington Avenue. I have concerns on two grounds. First, as a resident of Horseshoe Bay, I am going to leave my concerns. They've been addressed tonight. I will not bore you with that. I have, for the last, unfortunately, 30 years, been the artistic director of the Pandora's Box Vocal Ensemble Society. Pandora's Box is celebrating 30 years. I started it when I was 15, by the way. Anyway, we're celebrating our 30-year anniversary. I have had a youth group, Chantelope, the Spiritual Vocal Ensemble. The first concerts Pandora's Box did were at St. Monica's Church. And if it had not been for places like St. Monica's, we could not have started. We are now fantastically successful. We can now do 3 nights at the K-Meek. When you first start out as a group, you cannot do that. It's too expensive. I would suggest that there are many groups, such as Pandora's Box, that would appreciate it. I have done workshops at St. Monica's. I agree with the comments that the St. Monica's was let go into disrepair, which is probably why many of us did not return to it as a performance venue. But I have seen many an evening concert there with folk singers, Jim Burns, many people that have been very, very prominent in our community. We do not do folk concerts in an intimate environment in the middle of the gym in Glen Eagles. I'm sorry, it is not a fair comparison. We have not been able to do any event in the Glen Eagles or the golf course. We have asked the golf course for their beautiful room to do some fundraising. We cannot afford, our society now cannot afford to rent it. It is not that it is underused, it is overpriced. And we do not have an alternative in this part of West Vancouver, and the church should definitely be restored. I am in favor, even though I realize at this point this is not on the table, the roundabout. I'm in favor completely of that project. I think you would see considerable support from the community, and the artistic community should not be left out. We need small environments. We need, Pandora's Box is looking for somewhere to do a small fundraising carol service. What a great place, St. Monica's Church. Doesn't work in a gym. And I think that the character is what we're missing here. I think that as if you were in my profession, you look for ambience, we look for how it is going to come across when we're performing. It is very, very important. And I think please give the church a chance. And I'm not against density. I think we possibly need it in Horseshoe Bay, but not the way that this is proposed. So please consider revitalizing the church, giving it an opportunity, and allowing groups such as Pandora's Box to get on their feet. And this would be a perfect opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Dennis Walsh and then Lisa Russell.
Madam Mayor, councillors, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Dennis Walsh and I live on Imperial Avenue, just around the corner from the proposed rezoning. I love this place. My family and I would be directly affected by this both during its years of construction and afterwards. I am absolutely opposed to this rezoning. I'm a construction cost professional and have dealt with developers, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I've been involved in the fixing of some of the leaky condo projects after the developers folded their companies and left town. Donald Trump is a developer. I have no illusions about developers. Let's get real here. A developer can sell the rezoned parcel tomorrow at a huge profit. For the developer, this could be mission accomplished. Or he could sell it overseas. Lots of options for the quick cash kill. Currently, there are about 7 houses on Rosebery Avenue. This development would triple that to 21. I think planners refer to this as spot zoning. To me, it's simply density dumping. This is not suited to this street. This is a condo development with an underground parkade. My biggest concern is the underground parkade, a big chunk of concrete. I have serious safety concerns. The surrounding streets have no sidewalks. Pedestrians have to walk on the road. There is no pedestrian infrastructure to accommodate a development like this. Even if the developer agreed to build it, I doubt if he could. There is not enough space to build city standard sidewalks on both sides of Rosebery alone. Several of the country roads around this development are actually laneways, including Imperial Avenue where I live. Rosebery is a gateway out of the neighbourhood for me and my neighbours. The introduction of an underground parkade at this crucial junction will have a negative impact on the way we live. The condo dwellers, their visitors and service vehicles will introduce a constant stream of vehicles into a narrow country road with no sidewalks or adequate street lighting. Since this country road is shared by walking seniors and children, safety will become a major anxiety. Seniors, like myself, have reduced eyesight and hearing. Cars exiting a sloped parkade that will not have full visibility until they reach road level will be a daily threat to us. It will effectively make Rosebery out of bounds for walking. Children walking to Glen Eagles Elementary School or anybody walking to the bus stop will have similar concerns. Parents will insist on driving them for safety reasons. This will worsen the traffic congestion. This development would impede safe pedestrian access to transit. I don't know how I'm doing time. Anyway, with this proposed development, what you see is not what you get. Putting a huge mass of development below ground does not make it disappear. Imagine this whole development above ground, and then you'll appreciate the mass of what is being proposed on these small lots. It's housing for cars that contradicts a green agenda. Since this development with its underground parkade is designed for car use, it could be built anywhere in West Vancouver. It provides homes for cars for generations to come. West Vancouver is green in theory, but carbon in practice, and plans to be that way for the next generation. It will not only promote car usage for the new condo dwellers, but will also promote it for the existing residents by making the country roads less pedestrian friendly. If West Vancouver mandates an underground parkade literally opposite a bus stop, this is confirmation that going green is not a serious intention. A walking culture would be replaced by a car culture. There would be traffic congestion at the intersection. When the new condo development in Horseshoe Bay is completed, we will have a huge volume increase at the traffic circle where the proposed development is to be located. There has been no new road infrastructure to deal with this. This development will not only add 28 cars for new residents, it will add to the visitor and service vehicles that come with them. I am against this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Lisa Russell is next, and then the last speaker I have signed up is Angus Gunn.
Thank you so much for your time tonight. My name is Lisa Russell. I'm a resident of West Vancouver. My husband and I lead a local church that currently meets at the Glen Eagles Clubhouse since 2017. Previous to this, we met at St. Monica's property for a total of 6 years. Very early on in our time at St. Monica's, I fell in love with the space. It was and is a beautiful proportioned space, sensitively and artistically rendered. It is warm, acoustically rich, and purpose-built for small, intimate gatherings. It is unique in its merits and distinct from other spaces such as Glen Eagles Recreation Center because of its intimacy and warmth. It is also a historically rich property that has deep roots in the Horseshoe Bay neighborhood. I discovered this firsthand when I visited the archive of the Diocese in New Westminster and also the archives of the United Church. During my research, I discovered many gems linking the property to many of the well-known names and matriarchs of the Horseshoe Bay and the Wycliffe area. In the interest of preserving the legacy and the historical merits of this property, I wish to give a few brief highlights for Mayor and Council this evening. The earliest church services in the Wycliffe Horseshoe Bay area were held in various homes, the Horseshoe Bay Hotel, the Cottage Inn, and in the community hall. Early Anglican services were held in the 1920s and 30s by visiting priests. The Wycliffe Women's Guild was formed in 1941. This small group of local women arranged various social functions such as bake sales, auctions, and garden parties to raise money in hopes of establishing a permanent church hall for services. The church property was bought in 1947 by the Wycliffe Women's Guild for a whopping, get this, $108. The church hall was built in 1951, again largely thanks to this group of dedicated women. In 1957, the Synod purchased a north-facing lot next to the church for $2,500. The church secured a loan for $20,000 based on pledges from the congregation. Combined with $19,000 from the Synod, the church building was expanded to its current size. In 1973, St. Monica's Anglican and St. Matthew's United, then situated on the property of the now Glen Eagles School, started discussions about merging congregations. This was unprecedented in both denominations. Based on this unique and unprecedented amalgamation, the United Church Parish sold the St. Matthew's Church site to the school district. The St. Matthew's Church building was removed for the construction of the school. The monies from the sale of St. Matthew's were redistributed to the newly merged society that would meet at St. Monica's building. The two congregations shared the financial burden in keeping and running of the church. More recently, St. Monica's struggled financially, culminating in the closing of the church doors in 2014 and finally put up for sale in 2015. Revolution Church, that's where I come in, a Christian non-denominational society, rented the space at St. Monica's from the diocese since 2011 and occupied the space as the sole church since 2014. Finally, in 2018, and during the final sale of the building, Revolution Church moved permanently to the Glen Eagles Clubhouse and has been meeting there since. The space has since been vacant. From the very beginning, St. Monica's has been the result of a grassroots collective of local people who put in their hard work, finances, and vision into growing a spiritual community dedicated to connecting with the needs and heartbeat of their surrounding neighborhood. At its height, St. Monica's was no longer exclusively an Anglican parish, but a merged community of United and Anglican members with a uniquely non-denominational emphasis. The St. Matthew's Church was torn down in good faith that St. Monica's would remain. Since its inception, the church has been home to dozens of community groups, including daycare and preschool, recovery groups, scouts, guides, cultural events and concerts, theater productions, and other Christian congregations. At the time of the building's sale, the property was neither derelict or unused. It was occupied by a vibrant and growing local Christian congregation with a large children's church. In addition, the building was home to the Whitecliff AA-NA chapter, which had met in that location for over 25 years and was the only AA group serving the Bowen Island, Lions Bay, and Horseshoe Bay Glen Eagles community. Up until the for sale sign was posted on the front lawn, there was also a full-service daycare. The possibilities for further use were numerous, but limited by the diocese's desire for immediate sale at the price reflecting development rather than continued use as a nonprofit or community space. From a philosophical, spiritual, and historical perspective, this property deserves great respect and consideration. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thanks for that history. Yeah, you could. Maybe.
I do. I can send it. Yes.
We need to get it before we close the meeting.
Oh, can I print this?
Well, you could
I can send it. Yes,
yeah,
I
you
will.
can email it to us. Great. Thank you very much. Angus Gunn?
Madam Mayor, councillors, my name is Angus Gunn. I've lived in West Vancouver for over 50 years. I don't live in the Horseshoe Bay area. I do wish to appear in opposition to this proposal. All of the reasons why have been said, so in deference to the hour, and I hope without derogating from the strength of my conviction on it, I will simply associate myself with those comments. The one thing I wanted to pick up was the intriguing exchange between Councillor Cameron and the applicant earlier in the evening, where the question was posed, why, after so much time and so much feedback, is there no public component to this proposal? And the answer, to paraphrase, was there's no money in it. Can I suggest to you that as custodians and trustees of the land, there's no money in it that put these lands aside in the first place. It was the ambition and the vision and the sacrifice and the hard scrabble of Mrs. Sewell and others whose names we've heard tonight, who dedicated this land to the public good. And in my submission, the conversion of public land to private profit should generally be seen as a failure. It's a failure of ambition. It's a failure of commitment. And I submit that as custodians and as stewards of this land that we now stand in at this crossroads, we owe it to them and to ourselves to envision this land in a more ambitious and optimistic way than this proposal does. I urge you to reject it, or at least to defer it until after completion of the LAP. Thank you for your time, and thank you for staying late.
Thank you. All right. So now I have to ask 3 times whether there is anyone further who wishes to speak.
Sorry it didn't take 3 times.
I'll be very brief, because I know I've already spoken. I've had a privilege. I was hoping there would be a geoscientist amongst us tonight, but apparently there isn't. As an engineer, although not a professional engineer, I am puzzled by what I heard tonight about a geological survey. I heard a proponent, I heard a developer saying that he dug some holes, and I guess that would be the geotech survey. Geotech surveys, there is no online internet do-it-yourself geotech survey. It's very carefully regulated.
Mr. Astrid, I believe it is. No, or Mr. St. Pierre, your wife is Astrid. we are going to be provided with a geotechnical.
And that is my question.
professional
Do we have a
geotechnical-
report? And if
I
so,
think
is it signed by a
My
PM?
understanding is that we are going to be provided with that. Yes, and that is signed by,
Well, then I won't waste your time, but I wish we would have known a little bit earlier if there was a report. Why wasn't it made public earlier? Thank you.
It's signed and sealed by an engineer named Farshid Batay.
Is it?
It's signed and sealed by an engineer named Farshid Batay, B-A-T-E-I, and his company is GeoPacific.
And when is it dated?
October 1st,
October 2nd. He sealed it October 2nd.
dated letter, yeah.
Thank you. You've answered my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. I'll ask the second time if there's anyone who wishes.
I heard you the first time.
I have to legally
Legally.
announce it 3 times.
With all due respect to Mr. Bailey, replying to the question about any covenant on the property, insisting that it keeps it at community use, I believe that only a land title search would actually be able to reveal any formal covenant, and it would be historical research that would be required to reveal any informal covenant that had been referred to, and that it might be wise and prudent to do that beforehand. Also, too, I'd like to, as a past president of the Ambleside and Dunderave Ratepayers Association, I would like to point out that, we hold various meetings, including the all candidates meeting last year, where you were asked the question about community use space, and we find it incredibly challenging to get space for meetings such as that, and not to mention, even though it's at our community facilities, the costs are prohibitive for a member-funded group. And I join Mr. Pajari and others in being incredulous that the upzoning of this property does not affect its value. And the responses we've had so far tonight are, it's complex. And I would suggest to you that we really do deserve a fulsome explanation that we can, in fact, understand, that so we can understand why there is no property uplift with any potential rezoning. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Mr. Bailey, the CAC calculations are disclosable, or what can be provided as part of the public record?
Madam Mayor, as referenced before, we don't disclose confidential financial information, but I've been very clear about our process in doing that, talking about the numbers and the analysis that go into it, and that's standard practice across the region with every municipality in Metro Vancouver, as far as I'm aware.
Do we have any literature that's just on the calculation of residual land value? Is it on our website or anything like that?
Madam Mayor, we don't have any literature that I'm aware of specifically online, but if these folks want to email me, I'm happy to send them an email about the process and how we calculate land lift.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, and the third time, I'll ask if, yes, okay.
My name is Shona McDonald, and I live within 10 meters of St. Monica's Church. My 2.5-year-old nephew came bounding in a few weeks ago, very excited about the digger across the road. He is not a geotechnical engineer. However, it dug down a few feet and it was bouncing everywhere. So if there is silt and sand under there, it's very tightly packed. We might want to look at it a little more closely. I am opposed to the Tantalus Gardens development for all of the reasons laid out tonight. I don't believe it's the best and highest use of the land, and I ask you to say no tonight. However, if after all of this you choose to say yes to Tantalus Gardens, I want to formally request the following. A covenant of some kind somehow be put on St. Monica's Church building that ensures that it will remain safe and standing until such a time as the project, as currently proposed, is proven possible. This proof includes geotech reports made available to the public, engineering reports on the viability of the parking lot, including mapping out space for 21 cars, 14 storage lockers, 21 electrical plug-in units, and 7 elevator shafts, because apparently half of these homes are going to have elevators, and specific and detailed architectural drawings of the site and surrounding neighborhood. Piggybacking on that, if Tantalus Gardens is not able to be moved forward as currently proposed, Peter Nelson, CUMA, the developer or owner of the land, if sold, be subject to returning to a part of this process that includes a public hearing with public feedback, not just variance, but a meaningful engagement around a new plan. An encouragement, as you've heard many times, that if a yes is given, the yes be contingent on waiting for the LAP, for Horseshoe Bay is complete, and that the developer be asked to engage in that process and comply with the results. Finally, if the developer is given permission to move forward with Tantalus Gardens and public assembly space is lost to residential zoning forever, we ask the developer be made to pay for the rezoning in the form of CACs at a transparent rate comparable to other developments in the district. We ask that this amount be no less than $800,000 and that the community have a say in how the CACs are collected and allocated. Mayor and Council, for some of you, this is just another decision to be made. A decision about checks and balances, boxes ticked, a process. For the developer, this is about profit. For those of us who have spent weeks and months invested in considering this land, what it means, this is about the fabric of who we are as human beings, our connection to where we live, our connection to our environment, and our connection to each other. We are asking you to collaborate with us, to listen, to hear, to know we are willing to come to the table and compromise, work together for the highest and best use of this land for this community. You have the power to make a choice. Once you've made it, it will be behind you, but it will be in front of us. Please say no to Tantalus Gardens. We can do better. Thank you.
Thank you. No clapping. You've done well up till now. Thank you. So, yes, Mr. We started with you, I think.
You did, so maybe you'll end with me.
You want to have the bookends?
I'm an old guy, so it's a long evening. I heard it said that you can't declare how you calculate the CACs because it includes confidential information. But I also heard that the way you calculate them is you value the land as it was zoned, you value the land as it's being zoned, and I don't see anything confidential in that. I would have thought you get an appraiser and he gets comparatives before and after. What is confidential about that?
Mr. Bailey, do you want to?
So, again, Madam Mayor, we have no concerns with talking about how we do it, and we've disclosed how we do it a lot. Personal financial information, as well as the financial information gleaned by our third-party consultants that look at other people's financial information, is not shareable. It's confidential.
What personal financial information are you using, valuing?
Market comparables, as well as the information. We do look at the applicant's pro forma. We're not sharing that. And that's process.
But you said that had nothing to do with valuing
Madam
the
Mayor,
site.
I did not say that. I said
yes,
we
you
would
did.
take. I said we.
Sorry.
Well, I said
Mr. Cheevers, Mr. Bailey is trying to answer your question. It's not a
so
debate.
we look at information provided by the consultant. We also look at market comparables and other financial data. That's what goes into the pro forma analysis. Period.
Sorry, you said you looked at the personal pro forma provided by the developer. Now, is that what you said or not?
Madam Mayor, I don't think I really need to keep repeating myself.
Well,
I said what I said, and
No,
if
well,
the gentleman would like to contact me.
I'm sorry, maybe I'm simple, but I heard you say, Mayor, you simplified it for us. You said you value it before and you value it after.
Yeah, I simplified
Right.
the formula.
Now, is there anything complicated about that we can't learn?
Well, Mr. Bailey is prepared to share with you how that is done, but he's accurately explaining that it's based on the improvements to the property. So you have to have pro formas, you have to build in profit, you have financing, you have costs, you have expenses. There's a whole pro forma that is prepared. So that is unique to the property. And then there's also some appraisals that are done as well.
Can I make a suggestion? We're not going to disclose it in the next 3 minutes before we close the public hearing. But perhaps we could go back and, Ms. Lemus, and review in future what portions, if any, of these calculations and these reports we can disclose. If there is more that we can disclose, and we can consider, council can consider that. And if there isn't, but we're not going to achieve anything in the next 2 minutes.
I absolutely agree, but when you take a developer's pro forma, he will keep the value to a minimum in terms of...
It's not what it's based on.
Yeah. And also we have independent appraisals and third parties reviewing it, and it's not, So anyway, I don't blame you at all for not finding it very simple, and it's not any reflection, actually. It's just, it's probably more than we could get into tonight, but
So
we're
it's
happy to share what we can.
Okay, so it's never a transparent process then?
Well,
actually, I asked Mr. Bailey that yesterday, and what he can confirm, that I don't believe there's any community that shares, that we know of, at least I don't know of any community. I'll say that much. I don't know of any community that shares the CAC calculations. I think they're done in camera for a reason. I'm not going to speak to the validity of, it's validly in camera, but I'm not going to speak to whether more could be released, but I don't believe it is. And the other piece that you need to know, and I can speak as a lawyer on this, Mr. Bailey can add, there is a sensitivity here about CACs in general because they're of, let's just say, undetermined legal validity. And there are people in the development community who question the legality of the entire process. And so there's a desire by municipalities to make the process as consensual as possible. So I'll just leave it at that, but there's a whole context here that you're not aware of, and even I'm not 100% aware of. But it's not just as simple as throwing the money out there, because trading funds for density, if that's how it's perceived, that isn't how it's perceived. These are voluntary contributions. Is not straightforward. And Mr. Bailey, have I misstated anything to your knowledge?
Madam Mayor, through to Councillor Cameron, no, that's correct.
thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, so I think I've...
I'm not going to make you mad. All I want to say is, my name's Lori Baker. I live on Wellington, and I want to thank you all for your patience and listening to both sides and making sure everybody used their manners. And that's all I want to say. Thank you very much, and God bless you.
Thank you. And I actually wanted to reciprocate and just thank everyone for their respectful and courteous behavior tonight and your passionate and thoughtful comments about the community you love and want for the future. Council has listened carefully and takes this matter very seriously. And with that, I'm going to ask Council for a motion to either close or leave open the public hearing. And I don't think we've determined who's going to make that. So, sure. Councillor Soprovich?
I'll move that all written and oral submissions regarding proposed official community plan, bylaw number 4985-2018, amendment bylaw number 5011-2019, zoning bylaw number 4662-2010, amendment bylaw number 5012-2019, and development permit 19-001 for 6404 Wellington Crescent, 6403 Nelson Avenue, 6407 Nelson Avenue, Tantalus Gardens, up to and including the October 8th, 2019 public hearing be received and that the public hearing be closed.
And that's Wellington Avenue. Second that. Second that? Okay, so comments from Councillor Soprovich and Councillor Cameron first, and then anybody else.
Well, first off, to everyone that came tonight, I really appreciate all your comments. You start reading all this over a period of time, and it's good information. I think the applicant needs some closure. He needs a decision. And by closing this, we'll move along, and he'll get his decision, Madam Mayor, in 2 weeks.
Yeah, and actually, thank you, Councillor Soprovich. That was on my list to share with the group that we aren't making, I don't think I said that, we aren't making a decision tonight.
So I'm fine. I'll end there.
Just three quick points, Madam Mayor. I do want to echo your thanks to the community for the residents for their submissions. And, I think the tone of this debate has been, at least vis-a-vis council, has been extremely courteous and constructive and legitimate. And there's been some debates in the community recently that have been toxic and really unfortunate. And it's just so wonderful to see what a proper debate can look like. And I hope this is as well going forward. I think it speaks to the residents in Horseshoe Bay. So I'll say that. So thankful for that. Secondly, I think the point that needs to be made that I'm asked a lot, and I think others on the council can speak for themselves, but this notion of competing surveys, I have to confess, I place almost no weight on any survey. I place weight on, and what I mean is the numbers in the survey. When I get a letter, when I speak to someone on the street, someone phones me, sends me an email, I read that submission carefully and I look at the quality of the submission. And quite frankly, if 1,000 people tell me that they don't want poor people living in their neighborhood, this actually happens in West Vancouver. We don't want people who live in duplexes in our neighborhood. We've had that said, $2 million duplexes. I don't care about 10,000 people send me a letter saying that, I wouldn't give it any credence. But if one person sends me a piece of correspondence that articulates a new perspective and an important point, then I will give that the weight that it deserves and maybe determine it. So it's not about the quantity, and I know people have spent a lot of time quibbling about, taking issue with the numbers and how they're represented. Quite frankly, it's about the substance of the points that are raised and the vision that we've articulated for the community that we're trying to fulfill. So that's important. I think the third thing you should all know, and it's been said, but I think it needs to be said again, every single person on council that I've ever served with in 8 years, and Councillor Soprovich would echo this in his 20-something odd years, we read every single piece of correspondence. We read, we listen. We're happy to have conversations with people. We phone people back when they phone us. We agonize over these decisions. So there should be no doubt in anyone's mind that they haven't been heard. That doesn't mean that you'll necessarily get your way. As Councillor Soprovich likes to say, you get your say, but you don't necessarily get your way. Disagree, sorry to steal your saying, but disagreements can happen. Reasonable people can disagree on issues, but that doesn't mean you haven't been listened to. It just means that after weighing everything, people make different decisions based on their own judgment. So everything has been considered, and that goes really for every issue that's come before council. It takes a lot of time. I mean, this is a lot of stuff to read, and I read some of them 2 and 3 times so I can make sure I get every point. But it's very diligent, and quite. I have to also say, staff also do an incredible job in considering all of the correspondence and in reading it and compiling it. So that is something at the district here we take very seriously.
Thank you, Councillor Cameron, for those comments. Councillor Wong.
Thank you, Your Worship. Certainly, I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight, whether you were on one side of the issue or the other. Thank you for coming out and sharing your thoughts with us. You know, as elected officials, I think it's really important for the citizens and the residents to come and make connections and tell us what's on your mind, because at the end of the day, I represent you. And so for those of you who were against this proposal, thank you for wrestling through the entire process. Early on, you will have heard me saying, I really want to hear what your thoughts were, besides just saying no. What did you mean by that, right? Is it fewer units, 0 units, something else completely? So thank you for wrestling through it alongside us. I was very pleased to hear all of you speak tonight and for all of the emails and phone calls that you've made to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so any other, Councillor Thompson?
I just can't let the evening close without also putting in my thanks for your quality input, your time, your patience, and intestinal fortitude. Thank you.
All right. So on that, then I will call the question on the motion before us. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. The public hearing is now closed. So I will just remind council and the public that we cannot receive any further submissions. If we receive emails, we cannot read them. We cannot engage in conversation with any residents about this. We can't meet for coffee and talk about this. We are precluded from receiving any more submissions. Thank you. And the date is October 28th that we will be making a decision on the
Second and third reading.
on the second and third reading. So that's, yes,
The public
we need
hearing has
a-
already been closed.
Pardon me?
Sorry, Your Worship, please clarify on October 28th, are we going to have another meeting like this, or you just publish it on the web, or how will we know?
No, there'll be a meeting to debate the actual second and third readings, but no further public submissions. So people can watch it on TV, they can come and sit in the gallery, but we can't take any more, we can't receive any more information on this matter. So do we need an adjournment motion as well, or is that?
Madam Mayor, the public hearing has been closed.
We closed it.
That was
so we're done.
11:28, that's correct.
Okay, thanks for coming. Have a good evening.